This is the Illinois Review, A Formal Feeling. My name is Kyoko Uchida, and my prose piece in the Illinois Review is called Nonetheless, an Excerpt. Thank you for joining me in Brooklyn, New York. They arrived into rain. This is how the story begins. The one she tells herself keeps telling herself for years afterward. They arrived into a city of rain. Then many weeks later, light, unbearable light and heat. First, in January, the almond tree burst into bloom, an explosion of white but in slow motion, as though time had broken up into luminous fragments flying outward. No, to describe beauty as an explosion was obscene. She said to herself simply, beautiful. Language was a minefield. No, a ticking time bomb. No, would have been, if she could have spoken. Later, she missed the language of not knowing. For 40 days and 40 nights, rain fell like blows, slicking the stone steps so she was afraid to walk. Cold steeped into stone and concrete, the interior walls icy to the touch under high ceilings built for summer heat. Each finger ached at the joints. What sunlight fell through the kitchen windows was yellow and gray, the color of old newspapers. Yet as soon as the rain stopped, there was color, brilliant color, and everywhere at once. Fits of cyclamens from palest pink to giddy maroon, a hummingbird outside the bedroom window in cobalt blue, flecked gold and rubies so saturated it looked artificial, a jeweled illusion. Perhaps it wasn't real, neither the hummingbird nor the rose pearl doves bobbing their tiny mechanical heads, nor the neat square of buttered light on the opposite wall. The middle-aged man who stopped her on the corner had an awkward but kindly manner, like someone apologetically pointing out a dry cleaner's tag on a stranger's collar. Stepping out from under a shop awning as though he'd been waiting for her, he said, "A worker? I'm looking for a worker. My wife, she is ill and I need someone." She must have looked surprised, for he immediately backed away, shaking his head and nodding at the same time. "You don't know. No, you don't know." What was it that she did not know? He used the verb to know, as in to know the grammar, to know the answer, to know a woman, different from the verb to know, as in to be acquainted with, to know someone, the city, the custom of the country. No, she did not know what she did not know. Presumably it was a domestic worker that he needed, a helper. But what was it he thought she ought to know? If he were asking, "Do you know someone who could come work for me?" he would have used the second verb to know, but he had not. She stood there, wanting to be helpful, trying to read his mortified smile. But he turned and hurried up the side street. His shirt, while blindingly white, needed ironing. Sometimes she herself was unknown. When she greeted her husband's colleague who lived on the same street, he hurried past, mouth vaguely terrified, before she could remind him that they'd met before. A photographer from Janine angrily denied ever having met before, even though they'd sat at the same table over a 2-hour lunch just a month earlier. Others introduced themselves anew at each meeting, asked her to repeat her name the same number of times. Sometimes she was unknown to herself. Strangers asked after families they claimed she worked for were taken aback when she did not recognize them from places she'd never been. "But you're mistaken," a man who greeted her in front of the bakery insisted. "I know who you are." She backed away, crushing the sunflower seed loaf against cold sweat as passers-by looked them over before striding on. "But I know you," he shouted, pointing at her. "I know you." They were bewildering, these other selves she did not know. Bewildered, she felt wilder, beside herself, standing next to a copy of herself, invisible to herself. Sometimes she fled the scene, crossing against a red light to honks and what she assumed were curses, only to find herself still standing there, rooted to her shadow on the scarred sidewalk. She would have liked to meet them, those other versions of herself with their multiple lives, trade stories about being mistaken for one another. But the live-in nurses and domestic workers she saw outside the coffee shop or the post office or the park turned their heads in a studied pose of indifference. The nannies of foreign correspondents and UN and EU officials looked through her as if, by acknowledging them, by showing even with the slightest smile she saw them, she had insulted them. "You are not one of us. Don't you know your place?" Thank you. If you enjoyed my work, you will surely enjoy the other pieces in the Illinois Review.